Fearless black heroes save loyal German shepherd from giant eagle attack eagle dog. You people need to leave right now. This is private property, and your dog is a menace to these protected birds. With all due respect, sir, my dog Max is trained to stay right by my side, and we're not leaving until we get that eagle away from your grandson. James Washington stood firm, his weathered hands steadying the trembling German shepherd at his side. Across from him, the park ranger's face was twisted with anger and fear, but James's eyes were fixed beyond the man, to where a massive golden eagle had pinned down a small boy against the rocky outcrop. The boy, the ranger's own grandson, was screaming, arms raised to protect his face as the bird's enormous wings beat the air, its talons dangerously close to the child's eyes. "Please," James said, his voice lower now, "just let us help. My friends and I have dealt with this before." Behind James, Eleanor Matthews adjusted her glasses, her 70-year-old hands already reaching for the special net in her backpack. Walter Johnson, still in his postal worker uniform from his morning route, stepped forward with the whistle they'd used in similar rescues. The three black seniors formed a determined line against both the hostile ranger and the dangerous bird. The eagle screeched, its wingspan easily 6 feet across as it lunged toward the boy again. "We have about 30 seconds before that bird does real damage," Eleanor said calmly, though her heart was pounding. "Your choice, Ranger." The ranger's face crumpled as his grandson screamed again. "Fine, but if your dog attacks, Max won't move until I command him," James said, already advancing toward the scene, the well-trained German shepherd staying perfectly at his heel despite the commotion. "Walter, the whistle." The eagle reared up, its majestic but terrifying form silhouetted against the clear blue Colorado sky as Walter raised the whistle to his lips. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when James Washington began what should have been an ordinary morning walk with his beloved dog, Max. James Washington woke just before sunrise, as he had nearly every day since retiring from teaching high school history 15 years ago. At 74, his routine was sacred. Coffee with 1 sugar, toast with a scrape of peanut butter, and the morning paper spread across his kitchen table. The headline about conservation efforts in the Rocky Mountain National Park caught his eye as he sipped his coffee. "What do you think, Max? Another trip to the mountains this weekend?" he asked, glancing down at the German shepherd who had been his loyal companion for the past 7 years. Max's ears perked up at his name, and James smiled. After losing his wife, Margaret, to cancer in 2011, Max had become his closest companion. The dog had been a rescue abandoned and abused before James had found him at the Denver Animal Shelter. The shelter workers had warned James that the dog might never fully trust humans again, but James had seen something in those intelligent brown eyes, a desire to connect that mirrored his own loneliness. "Let's get our walk in early," James said, folding the newspaper. "Eleanor and Walter want to meet at the park at 9. Outside, the April morning was cool but promised warmth later. James's neighborhood in the historic 5 Points area of Denver had changed dramatically over the decades. Once the heart of the city's black community, the Harlem of the West, as it was called in the 1940s and 50s, it had seen hard times in the 70s and 80s before the more recent wave of gentrification brought coffee shops and condos. James had refused numerous offers to sell the house he and Margaret had bought in 1975, determined to remain in the community where they had raised their daughter, Michelle. As he walked Max along the familiar route, he waved to Mrs. Thompson watering her impressive rose garden and nodded to the young white couple who had recently moved in across the street. They always seemed slightly nervous when they saw him, which amused rather than offended James. He had lived through too much real prejudice to be bothered by awkward neighbors. His phone rang just as he rounded the corner by the old jazz club that was now an artisanal bakery. "James Washington speaking," he answered, his teacher's diction precise and clear. "James, it's Eleanor. You won't believe what I just heard from my bird-watching group." Eleanor Matthews had been the school librarian at the same high school where James taught history until they both retired in the same year. Their friendship had deepened after they both lost their spouses, though Eleanor was quick to inform anyone who assumed they were romantically involved that she had enough of marriage the first time around, thank you very much. "What's got you all excited this morning?" James asked, smiling at Eleanor's enthusiasm. At 70, she had more energy than most people half her age. "The Riverton Wildlife Society spotted a pair of golden eagles nesting near Clear Creek." "Golden eagles, James. They haven't been seen in that area for over a decade." "That's wonderful, Eleanor," James said, genuinely pleased. Eleanor's passion for bird watching had grown into a serious commitment to local conservation efforts in recent years. "We should go see them," Eleanor continued. "Walter's off today, I already called him," James chuckled. "You've got it all planned out, haven't you? You know me too well. Can you meet us at 9 at the community center? Walter will drive." "Max and I will be there," James promised before ending the call. By 9:15, James was settled in the back seat of Walter Johnson's meticulously maintained 1986 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, with Max lying calmly at his feet. Walter had been a postal worker for over 30 years before retiring, and his car reflected the same attention to detail he had brought to his mail route. "This car still looks like it just rolled off the assembly line," James commented, running his hand over the pristine leather seat. Walter beamed with pride as he adjusted his driving cap. "They don't make 'em like this anymore. My son keeps trying to get me to buy one of those hybrid things, but why fix what isn't broken?" "Because the planet is broken, Walter," Eleanor interjected from the passenger seat, not looking up from the bird guidebook she was studying. "But we'll save that argument for another day. Today is about those eagles." As they drove toward Clear Creek just west of Denver, Eleanor filled them in on what she knew about the golden eagles. "They're magnificent birds, wingspan up to 7 feet, and they can dive at speeds of over 150 miles per hour when they're hunting." "What do they hunt?" Walter asked, carefully navigating the winding road that led up into the foothills. "Small mammals mostly," Eleanor replied. "Rabbits, ground squirrels. Sometimes they'll take larger prey like foxes or young deer." "And they're nesting out here?" James asked, absently stroking Max's head. The dog had been specially trained to remain calm around wildlife, part of the rehabilitation process that had helped transform him from a fearful, aggressive rescue into a confident, obedient companion. "According to my contact at the Wildlife Society, they've built a nest on one of the rock formations overlooking the creek," Eleanor explained. "It's unusual this close to the city, but with the conservation efforts in this area over the past few years, we're seeing more wildlife returning." Walter nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear. When I started delivering mail out in this area back in '78, you'd see all kinds of wildlife. Then the developers started coming in, and it all disappeared for a while." The conversation shifted easily to memories of how Colorado had changed over the decades they'd lived there. James had moved to Denver from Alabama in 1969, after serving in Vietnam. Walter was a Denver native whose parents had come from Texas during the Great Migration of the 1940s. Eleanor had arrived in the 1980s after her first husband got a job at the university. "Remember when they were building the new airport in the 90s and all those conspiracy theories started?" Walter laughed. "My brother-in-law was convinced they were building underground bunkers for when the government collapsed. People always need something to be afraid of," James said, his tone more serious. "Fear makes it easier to control folks. I tried to teach my students to question everything, especially fear." "Is that why you got in trouble with the school board that time?" Eleanor asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. James smiled at the memory. 1983. I wanted to teach my students about the civil rights movement from the perspective of the participants, not just the sanitized version in the textbooks. Some parents complained I was being political in the classroom." "You were ahead of your time, James," Walter said, turning the car onto the gravel road that led to the Clear Creek trailhead. "No, I was exactly of my time," James corrected gently. "It's just that some people weren't ready to hear it." The parking lot at the trailhead was nearly empty when they arrived, just a few cars belonging to hikers who had gotten an early start. Walter found a spot in the shade, and they gathered their supplies: binoculars for Eleanor, a walking stick for Walter, a small backpack with water and snacks for James, and a leash for Max. "Now remember," Eleanor said as they set off on the trail, "we're here to observe, not disturb. Golden eagles are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It's illegal to harass them or disturb their nests." "Yes, ma'am," Walter said with a mock salute. "No eagle harassment on my watch." The trail followed the creek for about half a mile before beginning to climb the hillside. It was a popular spot, with clear water flowing over smooth stones and shady cottonwood trees along the banks. As they walked, Eleanor kept her binoculars ready, scanning the rocky outcrops above for any sign of the eagles. "This reminds me of taking Michelle fishing when she was little," James commented as they paused by a small pool where trout were clearly visible in the clear water. "Margaret would pack a picnic and we'd spend the whole day by the water. Michelle never had the patience for fishing, though. She was always off exploring." "How is Michelle?" Walter asked. "Still in Chicago." "Still in Chicago, still working too hard," James confirmed. She's talking about coming out for a visit this summer with the grandkids. They're growing up so fast. Jacob is starting high school in the fall. High school already? Eleanor exclaimed. Wasn't he just learning to walk last year? James laughed. Sometimes it feels that way. Time moves differently when you're our age. They continued up the trail, the conversation flowing easily among old friends. Max trotted alongside James, occasionally stopping to sniff at an interesting scent, but always returning promptly to his side. The dog's transformation from the frightened, aggressive animal James had adopted to this confident, well-behaved companion was a source of immense pride for James. About a mile into their hike, Eleanor suddenly stopped and raised her binoculars. "There," she whispered excitedly, pointing to a rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile ahead and several hundred feet above the trail. "I can see the nest." James and Walter followed her gaze. Even without binoculars, they could make out the large, messy structure of sticks perched on a ledge of the rock formation. After a moment, James spotted movement, a large brown bird with a distinctive golden sheen to its neck feathers as it caught the sunlight. "Oh, it's magnificent," Eleanor breathed, passing her binoculars to Walter. "That is something," Walter agreed as he looked through them. "Bigger than I expected." When it was James's turn to look, he was struck by the majesty of the bird. The golden eagle was perched on the edge of the nest, its sharp eyes surveying the landscape. "Magnificent is right," he said, handing the binoculars back to Eleanor. "Let's get a little closer," she suggested. "There's a viewing spot just up ahead where we should have a better angle." They continued up the trail, Eleanor barely containing her excitement. As they rounded a bend, they came across a small group of people already at the viewing area, a man in a park ranger uniform, an older white woman with expensive-looking camera equipment, and a boy of about 10. "Good morning," the ranger greeted them, his smile fading slightly as he noticed Max. "I'm afraid dogs aren't permitted on this section of the trail, sir." James was surprised. "I've hiked this trail with my dog many times over the years. When did the policy change?" "It's a temporary restriction due to the eagles nesting nearby," the ranger explained. "Dogs can disturb the wildlife, especially birds of prey." "Max is very well trained," James assured him. "He won't be any trouble." The ranger's expression remained firm. "I'm sorry, but the rule applies to all dogs, regardless of training. You're welcome to continue without the dog, or you can return to the main trail where pets are allowed." Eleanor stepped forward, her birding credentials from the Audubon Society already in her hand. "We're here to observe the golden eagles. I'm with the Riverton Wildlife Society, and we've been monitoring the return of raptors to this area for the past 3 years. The ranger seemed slightly mollified by Eleanor's official-sounding association. "Well, you can observe from here, but I still can't allow the dog any closer to the nesting site." Before James could respond, the boy who had been standing quietly beside the woman with the camera equipment spoke up. "Is that a German shepherd? He looks just like the police dogs." James smiled at the boy. "His name is Max. He's a German shepherd, but he's not a police dog. He's my companion." The boy looked up at the woman, presumably his grandmother, who nodded permission, and he approached carefully. "Can I pet him?" "If you'd like," James said. "Max, sit." The dog immediately complied, sitting calmly as the boy reached out to stroke his fur. "He's so soft," the boy exclaimed. "What kind of tricks can he do?" "Tommy, don't bother the gentleman," the grandmother called. "It's no bother," James assured her. To the boy he said, "Max knows lots of commands. He can stay, heel, come, lie down." He demonstrated a few simple commands, which Max performed perfectly. The ranger watched this interaction with a slightly softer expression, but still said, "I appreciate that your dog is well behaved, sir, but I'm afraid the rules are the rules." James nodded, understanding the ranger's position even if he disagreed with it. "We'll stay here then. This is a good spot for viewing anyway." Eleanor had already set up her portable spotting scope and was making excited notes in her bird journal. Walter struck up a conversation with the grandmother, who turned out to be an amateur wildlife photographer hoping to get shots of the eagles for a local conservation magazine. "I've been waiting for 2 hours already," she explained. "The female is on the nest, but the male has been coming and going. They have chicks, according to the ranger." "Fascinating creatures," Walter said. "I've lived in Colorado my whole life and never seen a golden eagle up close." "It's a privilege," the woman agreed. "Clara, by the way, and that's my grandson, Tommy. He's visiting from California." "Walter Johnson," Walter introduced himself. "And that's Eleanor Matthews with the scope, and James Washington with the dog your grandson has apparently adopted." Clara laughed as they all looked over to where Tommy was now showing James a handheld video game. "Tommy doesn't get to spend much time with older people." His parents both work long hours, and when he visits me, I think he appreciates the attention. Kids need that, Walter agreed. My grandchildren are all grown now, but when they were little, I made sure to spend quality time with each of them. It's important to pass on our stories. As they chatted, Eleanor suddenly called out, "Look, the male is returning to the nest." Everyone turned to watch as a magnificent golden eagle soared toward the rocky outcrop, something clutched in its talons. Through the scope, Eleanor could see it was a rabbit, presumably food for the nesting female and their chicks. "Oh, I need to get this," Clara exclaimed, hurrying to position her camera for the shot. The ranger stepped closer to the edge of the viewing area, raising his own binoculars. "Looks like a successful hunt. That's a good sign for the health of the ecosystem." Tommy had lost interest in his game and was now standing beside James, watching the eagles with wide-eyed wonder. "Can I look through your friend's telescope?" he asked. "We'll have to ask her," James replied. "Eleanor, would you mind if Tommy had a look?" Eleanor smiled warmly at the boy. "Of course not. Come here, young man, and I'll show you how to use it." As Eleanor adjusted the scope for Tommy's height, James noticed Max had become alert, his ears perked up and his body tense. Following the dog's gaze, James scanned the area but saw nothing unusual. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, placing a reassuring hand on Max's head. The dog relaxed slightly at his touch but remained vigilant. The ranger had overheard. "Everything all right with your dog?" "He seems to sense something," James explained. "He's very attuned to his surroundings." The ranger frowned. "Another reason dogs can be disruptive in wildlife areas, they pick up on things that can spook the native animals." James was about to respond when Eleanor called out, "James, Walter, come look at this. The female is feeding the chicks." James gently tugged Max's leash. "Come on, boy, let's go see." But Max resisted, which was unusual for the normally obedient dog. "Max, come," James said more firmly, and reluctantly the dog followed, though he kept looking back over his shoulder. Through Eleanor's scope, James could see the female eagle tearing small pieces from the rabbit and carefully feeding them to what appeared to be two fluffy chicks in the nest. It was a remarkable sight, intimate and primal at the same time. "Nature at its finest," Walter commented as he took his turn at the scope. The ranger checked his watch. "I need to make my rounds. Please stay on the marked trail and keep your distance from the nesting site." With a final pointed look at Max, he headed back down the trail. "He seems very concerned about your dog," Clara remarked after the ranger had gone. James shrugged. "Some people see a big dog and automatically assume trouble. Max has never harmed any wildlife. In fact, he's helped me rescue injured birds before." "Really?" Tommy asked, intrigued. "Really," James confirmed. "Once we found a hawk with a broken wing. Max was the one who spotted it, and he stayed perfectly still while we wrapped it in a towel and took it to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center." "That's so cool," Tommy exclaimed. "My mom won't let me have a dog. She says they're too much work." "They are a responsibility," James acknowledged, "but they give back more than they take, in my experience." As they continued to observe the eagles and chat, the morning passed pleasantly. Eleanor filled Tommy in on eagle facts, delighted to have an enthusiastic young audience. Clara got some excellent photographs. Walter shared trail mix from his seemingly bottomless pockets. Around noon, they decided to have lunch at a picnic area nearby. As they gathered their things, Max became alert again, this time with a low growl. "What's the matter, Max?" James asked, concerned now. Max rarely growled. Then they all heard it, a child's scream coming from somewhere up the trail. "That sounds like trouble," Walter said, already moving in the direction of the sound. "Tommy, stay with me," Clara said, grabbing her grandson's hand. Another scream, louder this time, spurred them all into action. James unclipped Max's leash. If they were heading into an emergency, the dog would be more help without it, but commanded, "Max, heel," ensuring the dog would stay right by his side. They hurried up the trail, following the sounds of distress. After a couple hundred yards, they rounded a bend and saw a terrifying scene. A young boy, not much older than Tommy, was huddled on a rocky outcrop that jutted from the hillside. Above him, a golden eagle, presumably the male they had been watching earlier, was swooping repeatedly, its massive wings creating gusts of air that threatened to knock the boy off the narrow ledge. The boy was screaming and trying to protect himself with his arms, while below, the ranger they had met earlier was frantically trying to find a way up to the outcrop. "Tommy, stay here with Mrs. Clara," James commanded as he, Walter, and Eleanor rushed forward. "What happened?" Eleanor called to the ranger. The ranger turned, his face pale with fear. "My grandson, he wandered off while I was doing my rounds. He must have tried to get closer to the eagles." His voice broke. "That ledge is at least 20 feet up, and I can't reach him, and now the eagle thinks he's threatening the nest." Indeed, the eagle was becoming more aggressive, each dive bringing its sharp talons closer to the terrified child. "We need to distract the eagle," Eleanor said quickly, reaching into her backpack. "I have a bird whistle that mimics a hawk call. It might draw the eagle's attention away from the boy." "And I can reach him," James said, eyeing the rock face. "I used to do some climbing." "It's not too steep." "You're 74 years old, James," Walter protested. "Which means I've had plenty of practice," James replied with a grim smile. "Besides, we don't have time to wait for rescue services." The ranger looked from James to the rock face and back. "It's too dangerous for both of you." "More dangerous than leaving a child to face an angry eagle," James countered. "I'll go up with Max. He can help keep the eagle at bay while I get the boy down." "No dogs near the eagles." The ranger insisted. "It's against regulations. You people need to leave right now. This is private property, and your dog is a menace to these protected birds." "With all due respect, sir, my dog Max is trained to stay right by my side, and we're not leaving until we get that eagle away from your grandson." James Washington stood firm, his weathered hands steadying the trembling German shepherd at his side. Across from him, the park ranger's face was twisted with anger and fear, but James's eyes were fixed beyond the man, to where a massive golden eagle had pinned down a small boy against the rocky outcrop. The boy, the ranger's own grandson, was screaming, arms raised to protect his face as the bird's enormous wings beat the air, its talons dangerously close to the child's eyes. "Please," James said, his voice lower now, "just let us help. My friends and I have dealt with this before." Behind James, Eleanor Matthews adjusted her glasses, her 70-year-old hands already reaching for the special net in her backpack. Walter Johnson, still in his postal worker uniform from his morning route, stepped forward with the whistle they'd used in similar rescues. The three black seniors formed a determined line against both the hostile ranger and the dangerous bird. The eagle screeched, its wingspan easily 6 feet across as it lunged toward the boy again. "We have about 30 seconds before that bird does real damage," Eleanor said calmly, though her heart was pounding. "Your choice, Ranger." The ranger's face crumpled as his grandson screamed again. "Fine, but if your dog attacks, Max won't move until I command him," James said, already advancing toward the scene, the well-trained German shepherd staying perfectly at his heel despite the commotion. "Walter, the whistle." Now back to where we started. The eagle reared up, its majestic but terrifying form silhouetted against the clear blue Colorado sky as Walter raised the whistle to his lips. The shrill sound cut through the air, mimicking the call of a red-tailed hawk, a natural competitor of eagles. The golden eagle paused its attack on the boy, its head swiveling toward the sound. Eleanor quickly pulled a compact net from her backpack and extended its telescopic handle. "James, go now," she called. James didn't hesitate. Despite his age, he moved with the sure-footed confidence of a man who had spent his life in the outdoors. "Max, with me," he commanded, and the German shepherd stayed precisely at his heel as they approached the base of the rocky outcrop. The ranger watched in astonishment as the elderly man began to climb, finding handholds and footholds with practiced ease. Max followed, somehow finding his own path up the steep rock face. Walter continued to blow the whistle at intervals, keeping the eagle distracted. Eleanor stood ready with the net, though she hoped she wouldn't need to use it. Capturing a protected species, even temporarily, could result in significant legal trouble. "Just keep it away from my grandson," the ranger called, his earlier hostility completely gone, replaced by desperate hope. James was about halfway up the rock face when the eagle, perhaps realizing the hawk call was a ruse, turned its attention back to the boy on the ledge. It folded its wings and dove, a precision missile of feathers and talons. "James, hurry," Eleanor cried, but James was already moving faster, ignoring the protests of his aging joints. "Max, up," he called, and the dog scrambled ahead of him, reaching the ledge just as the eagle descended. Max didn't attack the bird. Instead, he positioned himself between the eagle and the boy, his teeth bared in a silent snarl, his body low and ready. The eagle pulled up sharply, powerful wings flapping as it hovered, uncertain about this new threat. James reached the ledge moments later, breathing hard from the exertion. The boy was pressed against the rock face, tears streaming down his face, a nasty scratch visible on his arm where the eagle's talons had already made contact. "It's all right," James said gently, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I'm here to help you down. What's your name?" Michael," the boy stammered. "Well, Michael, I'm James, and this is Max. He's going to make sure that Eagle doesn't bother you anymore while I get you down from here. Okay?" The boy nodded, his eyes wide as he looked at Max, who maintained his protective stance, never taking his eyes off the circling eagle. "Good. Now I'm going to help you onto my back and we're going to climb down together. It's not as hard as it looks, I promise." While James worked to secure the boy, the eagle made another dive. This time, Walter's whistle didn't distract it. The massive bird hurtled toward them, talons extended. "Max, shield!" James commanded, a special instruction he had taught the dog for protecting vulnerable animals during their wildlife rescue work. Without hesitation, Max moved to cover the boy with his own body, a living shield of fur and muscle. The eagle pulled up at the last moment, unwilling to tangle with a creature Max's size. Eleanor called up from below, "James, I'm coming up with the net." "No," James called back. "Stay there, we're coming down. The eagle won't attack if we move away from the nest." Indeed, the eagle's aggression seemed primarily territorial. Its nest with the female and chicks was visible on a higher ledge about 50 feet away. The boy had unwittingly climbed too close, triggering the male's protective instincts. James managed to get Michael onto his back, the boy's arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "Max, down," he commanded, and the dog began to carefully pick his way back down the rock face, still positioning himself between the humans and the eagle whenever possible. The descent was slower than the climb, with James acutely aware of the precious cargo on his back. His old bones protested, and his fingers cramped from gripping the narrow ledges, but determination drove him forward. This was far from the most dangerous situation he had faced in his life. Memories of Vietnam flashed briefly through his mind, but it was certainly the most precarious in recent years. About halfway down, Michael whispered in his ear, "I'm sorry, I just wanted to see the baby eagles." "Curiosity is good," James replied, his voice strained with effort. "But next time maybe watch from a safe distance." They were nearly to the bottom when James's foot slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, he felt himself falling backward, the added weight of the boy threatening to pull him off the rock face entirely. But then something pressed against his legs. Max had somehow positioned himself to brace James from behind, preventing the fall. "Good boy," James breathed, regaining his footing. A few more careful movements and they were on solid ground. The ranger rushed forward, tears in his eyes as he embraced his grandson. "Michael, are you hurt? Let me see your arm." The boy winced as his grandfather examined the talon scratch, but managed a brave smile. "I'm okay, Grandpa. The dog saved me." James sank to the ground, his legs suddenly feeling like jelly as the adrenaline ebbed. Max pressed against his side, and James wrapped an arm around the faithful dog. "We both did, didn't we, boy?" Eleanor and Walter hurried to James's side. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked, her expert eyes already assessing him for injuries. "Just tired," James assured her. "Not as young as I used to be." Walter handed him a water bottle. "Drink this, and next time maybe let someone else play the hero." James chuckled weakly. "Where's the fun in that?" The ranger, still holding his grandson close, approached them. His expression was a complex mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "What you did." He shook his head, seemingly at a loss for words. "No thanks necessary," James replied. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," the ranger said firmly. "Not anyone. I've been a ranger for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you and your dog just did." He extended his hand. "I'm David Miller, and I owe you an apology for how I acted earlier." James accepted the handshake. "James Washington, an apology accepted. Rules are important, but sometimes exceptions need to be made." David nodded, then looked down at Max with newfound respect. "That's some dog you've got." "He is," James agreed, scratching Max behind the ears. "He was rescued himself, you know. Spent the first 2 years of his life chained up in a backyard, barely fed, never shown any kindness. When I found him at the shelter, he was scheduled to be put down because he was too aggressive." David looked surprised. "You'd never know it now. We all have the capacity for change," James said simply. "Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us." Eleanor, always practical, interrupted. "That scratch needs to be cleaned and bandaged. I have a first aid kit in my backpack." As she tended to Michael's arm, Clara and Tommy caught up to them, having stayed back during the rescue. "That was amazing," Tommy exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. "You climbed up the rocks like Spider-Man and your dog was like a superhero," James laughed. "I'm a bit old for Spider-Man, I think, but Max here is definitely a hero." "Can I pet him?" Tommy asked eagerly. "Of course," James said. "Max, say hello to Tommy." The German shepherd, seemingly understanding that his work was done, wagged his tail and allowed Tommy to stroke his fur. "I got some photos," Clara said, holding up her camera. "Not that anyone will believe what happened without seeing it." "Speaking of which," Walter interjected, "we should probably report this to the wildlife authorities. A golden eagle attacking a human, even in defense of its nest, is significant." David nodded. "I'll file the report." But I want to emphasize that the eagle was just protecting its territory. Michael shouldn't have been climbing up there. He looked at his grandson sternly, though there was relief behind the admonishment. I'm sorry, Grandpa, Michael said again, wincing slightly as Eleanor applied antiseptic to his scratch. I won't do it again. You bet you won't, David replied, because you're grounded for the rest of your visit. Eleanor finished bandaging Michael's arm. It's not too deep, but you should have a doctor look at it to be safe. Bird talons can carry bacteria. David nodded gratefully. I'll take him to the urgent care center on our way home. James, having recovered somewhat, got to his feet with Walter's help. I think that's enough excitement for one day. Eleanor, I believe we were about to have lunch when all this started. Eleanor smiled. Always thinking of your stomach, James. Yes, there's a nice picnic area just down the trail. Why don't you all join us? James suggested to David and Michael, as well as Clara and Tommy. We have plenty to share, and I suspect we all could use a moment to catch our breath. David hesitated, then nodded. That would be nice, thank you. I need to call my supervisor first, but after that, lunch sounds good. As they made their way to the picnic area, Tommy walked beside James, peppering him with questions about Max and his training. Michael, despite his ordeal, seemed equally fascinated, watching the German Shepherd with newfound respect. The picnic area was a pleasant clearing with several wooden tables nestled among pine trees. While David made his call, the others began unpacking their lunches. Eleanor had brought sandwiches, Walter contributed his famous homemade trail mix, and Clara produced cookies that Tommy proudly announced he had helped bake. So, Clara said as they settled around the table, you three seem very prepared for wildlife emergencies. The whistle, the net, is this something you do regularly? Eleanor, Walter, and James exchanged glances. Not exactly, Eleanor answered. But we've had some experience with wildlife rescue. It's become something of a hobby, I suppose you could say. A hobby? Tommy asked, wide-eyed. Like saving animals? James nodded. Sometimes. It started about 5 years ago when we found an injured hawk in my backyard. None of us knew what to do, so we called the Wildlife Rescue Center. They were understaffed and asked if we could bring it in ourselves if they talked us through how to safely handle it. After that, Walter continued, we started volunteering at the center. At our age, we can't do the heavy lifting or the more dangerous rescues, but we help with the smaller animals, and sometimes we assist with releases back into the wild. That's how Max got his training, James added. The center had a program for training dogs to assist with certain types of wildlife work. Max had the perfect temperament for it, calm, focused, and gentle when needed. But climbing up a rock face to rescue a boy from an eagle isn't exactly a typical day for us, Eleanor clarified with a smile. David rejoined them, looking relieved. My supervisor is sending a wildlife biologist to check on the eagles, but he agrees that no action needs to be taken against them. They were just defending their nest. I'm glad to hear that, Eleanor said sincerely. Golden eagles are still recovering in this area. The last thing we need is for them to be relocated or, worse, euthanized because of a misunderstanding. David nodded, his expression softening as he looked at the three seniors. You know, when I first saw you on the trail with the dog, I made some assumptions. I thought you were just some tourist who wouldn't respect the wildlife. He paused. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for that. We've all made wrong assumptions in our lives, James said gently. The important thing is recognizing it and doing better next time. David looked thoughtful. You remind me of my father. He always said that wisdom comes from experience, and experience usually comes from making mistakes. Sounds like a smart man, Walter commented. He was, David agreed. He passed away last year. He was a ranger too, actually, taught me everything I know about the outdoors. I'm sorry for your loss, James said sincerely. David nodded in acknowledgement. These mountains were his favorite place. That's part of why I'm so protective of them, I guess. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate. Tommy and Michael, quickly becoming friends despite the age gap, sat together petting Max and sharing stories about their respective homes in California and Colorado. Clara showed Eleanor some of her wildlife photographs on her camera, and Walter and David discovered they had both served in the military, though in different eras. As the meal wound down, James found himself sitting next to David while the others were engaged in their own conversations. Can I ask you something? David said quietly. It's personal. Of course, James replied. How did you know what to do up there with the eagle with Michael? You didn't hesitate, you just acted. James considered the question. I suppose part of it comes from age. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to recognize when action is needed and when it's better to wait. But also, he paused, memories surfacing. I was in Vietnam, 1969 to 1971. I saw things there, did things. Had to make split-second decisions that meant life or death. David nodded, understanding in his eyes. Iraq for me, 2 tour. Then you know, James said simply, some training never leaves you. No, it doesn't, David agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, the world changed a lot while you were growing up, didn't it? Civil rights, Vietnam, all of it. James smiled slightly. Yes, it did. I was born in Alabama in 1950. Segregated schools, segregated everything. Came to Denver after the war because it seemed like a place where a black man might have a fair shot at a good life. He glanced at Eleanor and Walter, deep in conversation with Clara. It wasn't perfect, nowhere was, but it was better. I became a teacher, married a wonderful woman, raised a daughter who's now a surgeon in Chicago. You've seen a lot of change, David observed. And a lot that hasn't changed, James replied. But days like today give me hope. 3 old black folks, a white park ranger, and a golden eagle, all just trying to protect what matters to them. And in the end, we figured it out together. David smiled. That's a good way of looking at it. Their reflective moment was interrupted by Michael, who approached with Tommy beside him. Mr. Washington? Michael asked hesitantly. Yes, young man. I wanted to say thank you for saving me, and he glanced at his grandfather, then back to James. And I wanted to ask if maybe you could show me how to train a dog like Max someday. Grandpa says I might be able to get a dog when I'm older if I show I'm responsible enough. James smiled warmly. I'd be happy to share what I know, perhaps when you've completed your grounding. He gave David a questioning look. David laughed. We'll see. Maybe you could join us at the visitor center sometime. We have a junior ranger program that Michael participates in. I think the kids would love to learn about wildlife rescue work. That sounds wonderful, James said, genuinely pleased by the invitation. Eleanor and Walter would enjoy that too, I'm sure. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that the day's excitement had taken a toll on everyone, especially James. Despite his protests that he was fine, Eleanor noticed the stiffness in his movements and the fatigue in his eyes. I think it's time we headed back, she announced. James isn't going to admit it, but that rock-climbing adventure has worn him out. I'm perfectly capable, James began, but Walter cut him off. Save it, old man, we know you're tough, but even Superman needs to rest sometimes. James conceded with a smile. Fine, fine, I suppose I could use a hot bath for these old bones. They exchanged contact information. David promised to send Clara's photos of the rescue once she shared them, and Eleanor insisted on checking in later to make sure Michael's scratch was healing properly. Tommy extracted a promise from James that he could visit him and Max someday soon. As they walked back to the parking lot, James felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The day had certainly not gone as planned, but perhaps it had gone exactly as it should have. At 74, he had long since stopped believing in coincidences. Being in the right place at the right time with the right skills and the right companions, that seemed like something more than chance. Walter's Oldsmobile was waiting for them, gleaming in the afternoon sun. As James helped Max into the backseat, he noticed the dog seemed particularly alert, his eyes scanning the sky. Still on duty, eh, boy? James murmured, stroking the dog's head. You did good today, real good. Eleanor settled into the passenger seat with a contented sigh. Well, that was certainly more excitement than I bargained for when I suggested watching eagles this morning. Never a dull moment with you two, Walter replied as he started the engine. Though I'd appreciate if our next outing involved fewer life-or-death situations. As they drove back toward Denver, James gazed out the window at the mountains. He thought about David and Michael, about Clara and Tommy, about the golden eagles protecting their young. He thought about Max, once deemed too dangerous to live, now a hero. And he thought about himself and his friends, 3 seniors who society often overlooked but who still had so much to offer. Penny for your thoughts, Eleanor said, turning in her seat to look at him. James smiled. Just thinking about connections, how we're all tied together in ways we don't always see. Getting philosophical in your old age, James? Walter teased. Someone has to, James replied with a chuckle. You're too busy maintaining that car of yours, and Eleanor's got her head in the clouds watching birds. Speaking of birds, Eleanor said, I never did get a good look at those eagle chicks. We'll have to go back sometime. Next time maybe we stick to the viewing area, Walter suggested. Where's the fun in that? James echoed his earlier words, scratching Max behind the ears as the faithful dog dozed beside him. The 3 friends laughed, the sound filling the car as they headed home, the day's adventure already becoming a story they would tell and retell in the years to come, a testament to the fact that age hadn't diminished their capacity for courage, for connection, or for change. And in the clear Colorado sky above them, a golden eagle soared, returning to its nest, to its mate, to its young, a reminder of the wild, wonderful world they had all worked together to protect. Most birdwatchers never get such an opportunity. And this volunteer program sounds interesting, Walter added thoughtfully. Might be good to have a regular commitment, keeps the mind sharp. My thoughts exactly, James agreed. And there's the Junior Ranger program as well. Max would be the star attraction, of course. Of course, Eleanor said with a smile, reaching down to pat the dog who was lying quietly under the table. Our canine hero deserves the spotlight. The coffee shop owner, Mrs. Patel, approached their table with a fresh pot. Refills for my favorite customers, she offered, then noticed Max. And a treat for the famous rescue dog? News of their adventure had spread through the neighborhood thanks to Walter's daughter, who had posted Clara's photos on social media. The story of 3 black seniors and a German shepherd rescuing a boy from an eagle had captured people's imagination. Just half a cup for me, James said, holding out his mug. And Max would never refuse a treat. Mrs. Patel produced a dog biscuit from her apron pocket and offered it to Max, who took it gently after a nod from James. My nephew works for the Denver Post, she said. He's been asking if you'd be willing to do an interview about the rescue. James exchanged glances with his friends. They had declined several similar requests already, uncomfortable with the attention. We appreciate the interest, Eleanor responded diplomatically, but we're not looking for publicity. It wasn't about recognition, Walter added. We just did what needed doing. Mrs. Patel nodded understanding. I told him you'd say that, but he also mentioned something about a feature on senior volunteers in the community, not just about the rescue, but about all the work you do with the Wildlife Center and now this new eagle monitoring program. This gave James pause. That might be different if it could inspire other seniors to get involved in conservation efforts. Or even just to stay active, Eleanor added. Too many of our generation think retirement means sitting in a rocking chair waiting for the end. Walter laughed. Speak for yourself. Some days a rocking chair sounds pretty good to these old bones. Think about it, Mrs. Patel suggested. No pressure. Now who wants a slice of my fresh-baked coffee cake? As they enjoyed Mrs. Patel's excellent cake, the conversation turned to practical matters. Transportation to the eagle banding, scheduling for the volunteer program, what Max might need for the Junior Ranger demonstration. It's becoming quite a full calendar, Eleanor observed. A far cry from when we were all complaining about having too much time on our hands after retirement. James nodded, remembering those difficult first years after Margaret passed away, when the days had stretched endlessly before him, empty and purposeless. How different his life was now, filled with meaningful activities and valued friendships. Life has a way of surprising you, he said. 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be climbing a rock face to rescue a boy from an eagle at age 74, I'd have thought they were crazy. 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be friends with a man who climbs rock faces to rescue boys from eagles, I'd have thought they were crazy, Walter retorted with a grin. Eleanor raised her coffee cup. To crazy surprises, then, and to whatever comes next. To whatever comes next, James and Walter echoed, clinking their cups against hers. Max, having finished his treat, rested his head on James's foot and closed his eyes, content in the moment a sentiment James found himself sharing. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with courage and compassion, just as they had faced the eagle. The eagle banding day arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal for the delicate operation. James, Eleanor, and Walter met David at the trailhead, where they were introduced to Dr. Martinez, a small, energetic woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense manner and obvious passion for her work. David has told me all about your adventure, she said, shaking their hands firmly. Not many people would have had the presence of mind to handle that situation as well as you did. Most would have panicked or tried to attack the eagle. We've had some practice keeping cool in tough situations, Walter said modestly. Dr. Martinez nodded. David mentioned you volunteer at the Wildlife Rescue Center. I've worked with them on several rehabilitation cases. They do excellent work. They were joined by 2 of Dr. Martinez's graduate students and a photographer from the Wildlife Conservation magazine who would document the banding. Michael was there too, excited to be included in the scientific expedition. As they hiked to a different viewing area, one with better access to the nest site, Dr. Martinez explained the purpose of the banding. Each chick receives 2 bands, she said. A metal federal band with a unique number and a larger colored band that can be read from a distance with binoculars. This allows us to track migration patterns, lifespan, territory establishment, and other important data. Do the bands harm the birds? Eleanor asked. Good question, Dr. Martinez replied. They're carefully designed to avoid any interference with the eagle's normal behavior. The bands are lightweight and shaped to prevent injury or entanglement. When they reached the viewing area, Dr. Martinez set up her spotting scope and beckoned them over. Take a look. The chicks have grown significantly since your last visit. One by one, they looked through the scope. James was amazed at the transformation. The fluffy chicks were now nearly adult-sized, though still with some down visible among their developing feathers. They'll be fledging soon, Dr. Martinez said. Today is our last chance to band them before they leave the nest. She proceeded to outline the procedure. One of her students, an experienced climber, would scale the rock face to the nest. The parent eagles had been temporarily lured away with bait placed at a safe distance, monitored by the second student. The climber would carefully remove one chick at a time, lower it in a special bag to Dr. Martinez, who would perform the banding, take measurements and samples, and then return the chick to be raised back to the nest. It's a delicate operation, she emphasized. We need to work quickly to minimize stress on the birds and avoid keeping the parents away too long. As the team prepared their equipment, Michael sidled up to James. Is it like when you rescued me? He asked, his eyes wide with remembered fear and excitement. James smiled gently. A bit different. These folks are professionals with specialized training. What we did was improvised. But you knew what to do, Michael insisted, with your dog and the whistle and everything. We knew enough to help, James acknowledged. Sometimes that's all you need, enough knowledge to help and the courage to try. The banding operation proceeded smoothly. The climber reached the nest without disturbing the structure and carefully secured the first chick, a female, which was lowered to Dr. Martinez. She worked with practiced efficiency, attaching the bands, taking measurements, and collecting a small blood sample for genetic studies. Eleanor watched with fascination, asking informed questions about the eagle's development. Walter, meanwhile, had struck up a conversation with the photographer, who turned out to be a fellow Vietnam veteran. James found himself standing with David, observing the professional rescue operation with a new appreciation for the science behind wildlife conservation. It's quite different from our adventure, David commented, echoing James's earlier words to Michael. Indeed, James agreed. Though I must say I prefer this controlled approach to our improvised rescue mission. David laughed softly. As do I, though I'm still grateful for your improvisation that day. The second chick, a male, was brought down and processed just as efficiently as the first. As Dr. Martinez worked, she explained each step to the observers, her passion for the birds evident in every word. These chicks represent hope, she said. Golden eagles were nearly wiped out in this area due to habitat loss, poisoning, and shooting. Every successful nest is a step toward recovery. James thought about his own life, the challenges he had faced as a black man born in the segregated South, the losses he had endured, the joys he had found. Recovery, resilience, renewal, these were themes that resonated deeply with him. When both chicks had been safely returned to the nest and the parent eagles were beginning to circle back, Dr. Martinez gathered the group to thank them for their assistance and interest. This is how conservation works, she said, not just through the efforts of scientists and professionals, but through the engagement and support of the community. What you three did to protect both Michael and the eagles, that's the kind of balance we strive for, recognizing that humans and wildlife can coexist with mutual respect. As they hiked back to the trailhead, James found himself walking alongside Dr. Martinez. David mentioned you might be looking for volunteers for your monitoring program, he said. Absolutely, she replied. We need dedicated observers who can commit to regular visits to known nesting sites. It's not glamorous work, mostly sitting quietly, taking notes on behavior and activity patterns, but it's essential data. I think my friends and I might be particularly well suited to sitting quietly and taking notes, James said with a smile. It's a skill that comes with age. Dr. Martinez laughed. I find that I value my older volunteers enormously. They tend to be patient, observant, and committed. Plus, they usually have the best stories. By the time they reached the parking lot, it was settled. James, Eleanor, and Walter would begin training as raptor monitors the following month. They would be assigned to the Clear Creek nesting site, a gesture of appreciation from Dr. Martinez for their role in protecting the eagles during the rescue incident. As they prepared to part ways, Michael approached James once more. My grandpa says you're coming to teach us about dogs at Junior Rangers next month. That's right, James confirmed. Max and I are looking forward to it. Michael hesitated, then asked, could you maybe tell us the eagle rescue story too? The other kids would love it. James exchanged glances with David, who nodded encouragingly. I suppose we could share that experience, as long as we emphasize the importance of staying on marked trails and respecting wildlife boundaries. Of course, Michael agreed solemnly, having clearly learned his lesson the hard way. The day of the Junior Ranger program arrived in early June. The visitor center was packed with children aged 8 to 12, their eyes wide with excitement as James demonstrated Max's training techniques. Walter and Eleanor were there too, Eleanor explaining bird behavior while Walter shared stories of the wildlife they'd encountered over the years. The children were particularly captivated by Max, who performed his commands flawlessly and allowed the children to pet him under James's watchful eye. When James recounted the eagle rescue with appropriate emphasis on safety and wildlife respect, the room fell silent, every child hanging on his words. The most important thing to remember, James concluded, is that wild animals aren't good or bad, they're just trying to survive and protect their families just like we do. It's up to us to be smart about how we share space with them. Afterward, as the children swarmed around Max for final pats and questions, David approached with a woman James didn't recognize. James, I'd like you to meet Lisa Chen from the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. She's the education coordinator for our region. A pleasure, James said, shaking her hand. The pleasure is mine, Lisa replied warmly. I've been watching your presentation, and I'm incredibly impressed. We're developing a new outreach program focused on connecting seniors with environmental education opportunities, and I think you and your friends would be perfect consultants. And so began the next chapter in what James had come to think of as his third act. Over the following months, he, Eleanor, and Walter became integral parts of several environmental and community programs. They monitored the eagle nest weekly, recording the first flights of the juveniles and their gradual independence. They helped develop educational materials for the Senior Environmental Engagement Initiative. They continued their wildlife rescue work, with Max becoming something of a local celebrity. The Denver Post article eventually did appear, not as a simple human interest story about a dramatic rescue, but as a thoughtful feature on seniors finding purpose and community through environmental volunteerism. The response was overwhelming, with dozens of older adults reaching out to ask how they could get involved. James found himself busier than he had been since retirement, but it was a fulfilling kind of busy. He still made time for quiet mornings with Max, for phone calls with his daughter and grandchildren, for reminiscing with Eleanor and Walter over coffee at Mrs. Patel's shop. One evening, nearly a year after the eagle rescue, James sat on his back porch, watching the sunset with Max beside him. He was thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment, from a segregated childhood in Alabama to military service in Vietnam, from teaching history to eager, and sometimes not so eager, students to climbing a cliff to rescue a boy from an eagle at 74. Each challenge, each transition had shaped him but had not defined him entirely. His phone rang, interrupting his reflections. It was Michael. "Mr. Washington, guess what? I saw one of our eagles today." The one with the blue band, the female. She was hunting near the creek. James smiled at the boy's excitement. Over the months, Michael had become an enthusiastic junior ranger and budding ornithologist, often joining them on their monitoring visits when David was on duty. "That's wonderful news, Michael. Did you record the sighting in your journal?" "Yes, sir, with the date and time and everything, just like Dr. Martinez showed us. And guess what else? My parents said I can get a dog. And I come visit Grandpa this summer. Can you help me choose one? Not as big as Max, probably, but one I can train like him." "I'd be honored to help," James said, his heart warming at the trust this young boy placed in him. After they hung up, James sat a while longer as dusk gathered around him. Max rested his head on James's knee, and James stroked the dog's graying muzzle, aware that his faithful companion was aging just as he was. "We've had quite a year, haven't we, boy?" he murmured. In the distance, a hawk circled against the deepening sky, free and wild and magnificent. James watched it until it disappeared into the gathering darkness, then rose stiffly to his feet. Max stood with him, ready as always to follow where James led. "Come on, old friend," James said. "Let's get inside. We've got another busy day tomorrow." Max trotted alongside him as they made their way into the house, two companions who had found in each other the courage to change, to trust, to soar in their own way like eagles in the Colorado sky. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.